He thought the river would protect him, but even the river feared what was coming. The night burned red with dust and moonlight. The wind tore through the tall, dry grass, whispering warnings that no one could understand. A lone figure ran, bare feet striking cracked soil, breath sharp and uneven. His skin glistened with sweat and blood. Behind him, the earth trembled with the rhythm of pursuit. Something followed. Not one. Many. The sound was not a roar. It was a chorus, deep, rhythmic, and ancient. Laughter, twisted by hunger, the kind that only creatures born of the dark could make. He dared not look back. The moment he did, he knew he would stumble, and stumbling meant death. The moon hung low, swollen like a wound. It bathed the savanna in a pale, ghostly glow. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper a threat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a drum calling out to the predators. He carried nothing now. His spear was lost hours ago, torn from his hands when the first one lunged from the tall grass. He remembered the weight of its jaw, the cold of its breath, the sound of bone breaking, not his, not yet, but close enough to echo in his skull. Now, his only weapon was speed. The grass cut his legs, thorns bit into his soles. Still he ran. He could smell them, that heavy scent of rot and wet fur, thick in the air. He had smelled it before, near carcasses left half buried in the sand, the beasts that fed on death. But these were not scavengers. They hunted. Together, the ground dipped suddenly, a narrow gully splitting the plain. He leapt, stumbled, rolled down the slope. The impact forced the air from his lungs. For a moment, silence, only his heartbeat, frantic and loud. Then, the low rumble of paws above him. He pressed his body into the earth, covering his mouth. Dust filled his nostrils, the smell of clay, blood, and fear. He could hear them moving, deliberate, patient. They did not rush. They did not fight each other for the kill. They circled, communicated in low growls and brief silences. They were deciding. He had heard stories around the fire, tales of bone crushers, beasts that laughed in the dark and left nothing but splinters behind. But those were said to be creatures of the far lands, ghosts of an older time. Not here, not near his tribe. A shadow moved above the ridge, then another, then three. Their silhouettes were immense, sloping shoulders, thick necks, heads too large for their bodies. Their eyes caught the moonlight like shards of amber, and their legs, powerful, sinewed, made for endurance. One of them sniffed the wind, another growled low, as if to answer. They had his scent. He tried to still his breathing, but the body betrays the will. Every inhale felt like thunder. He pressed his chest deeper into the mud, praying to whatever sky still watched. The largest one stepped forward. Its outline alone was monstrous, taller than any wolf, heavier than a lion. Its jaw opened slightly, and from that darkness came a sound that froze his marrow. A slow, deliberate chuckle. It was laughter without joy. They moved again, splitting apart. One to the left, one to the right, one staying still. He realized the truth then. They were hurting him, as hunters do with prey. The river lay ahead. He could hear it, faintly, the sluggish sound of water over stone. If he could reach it, maybe they would stop. Maybe water would hide his scent. He rose silently, one hand gripping a rock for balance. His legs trembled, the muscles burning. He waited, for the growl, for the signal that would come, and when it came, that sharp bark from behind, he ran again, down the slope, across the dust. His feet found no purchase. Stones cut deep into his skin. He stumbled, rose, and pushed forward. The water glimmered like silver in the distance. Behind him, the laughter grew. Closer, louder. The ground began to shake, not with footsteps, but with the rhythm of pursuit. Dozens of them, perhaps. He could feel the heat of their bodies closing in, the air thick with their scent. He reached the riverbank and plunged in without thought. The cold hit him like stone. The current dragged at his limbs, sucking him down. He gasped, swallowing water, fighting to stay afloat. On the shore, shapes gathered, massive forms watching, waiting. They did not leap after him. Not yet. They walked along the edge, pacing. The leader, the largest of them, lowered its head to the water, eyes locked on his. In the moonlight, he saw its face clearly for the first time. A skull built for power, teeth curved and jagged, yellowed with age and kill. Scars traced its muzzle. Its breath rose in mist. It looked at him not as a beast looks at food, but as a hunter looks at a rival. He kicked harder, forcing his way toward the middle of the river. The current grew stronger. His muscles screamed. Each stroke sent lightning through his arms. But he was alive. Still alive. The creatures followed the bank, moving with eerie coordination. One slipped into the water downstream. Another vanished into the grass ahead. They were not chasing. They were waiting. He began to understand. The river curved. Its surface glittered with moonlight, beautiful, deceiving. But at the bend, something darker moved. Ripples. The shape of a log. No, not a log. Eyes. Two glimmering stones rising from the black. The crocodile. He froze mid-stroke. The ancient reptile drifted closer, silent as death. He turned back toward the shore. But there they were. The pack, lined along the bank, watching with slow patience. Trapped. Between jaws and laughter. The night pressed in, the air heavy with the scent of death and water. He could hear his own heartbeat, deafening in the silence. The crocodile slid nearer. The hyenas growled low. In that instant, he felt something strange. Calm. The kind that comes when all choices vanish. He ducked beneath the surface, eyes open to the blur of darkness. The cold burned his skin. He saw the shape of the crocodile twisting toward him, mouth opening, the faint shimmer of bubbles rising from its scaled body. He kicked upward, breaking the surface just as the beast's jaws closed behind him. The sound of water exploding. A wave lifted him, threw him toward the far shore. He landed hard, chest first, coughing, retching mud and blood. He crawled forward. The world swayed. The river roared behind him. And then, silence. No laughter, no growls, only the whisper of wind moving through grass. He looked back. The river reflected the dying moon. Nothing moved. The beasts were gone. For a heartbeat, he believed he was safe. He lay there, chest heaving, tears mixing with the river's mud. He whispered a word, a name, maybe of his kin, maybe of the gods. But then he saw it, across the river in the mist. A shadow stood, alone, immense. It watched him, head low, tail twitching, chest rising with slow, heavy breaths. It did not cross. It did not need to. It had already marked him. He could feel it, the way prey feels the gaze of the hunter even in dreams. The shadow turned. More shapes appeared beside it, moving through the haze, joining one another in silence. One by one, they vanished into the tall grass, their laughter fading into the night. He sat there for a long time, trembling, his skin cold beneath the rising dawn. He thought the river would protect him, but even the river feared what was coming. Days before the blood moon rose, before the laughter of the beasts broke the night, the world was quiet. The air shimmered with heat, the sun hanging pale and swollen above the dry plains. The season of thirst had begun, when even the wind seemed tired, and the rivers became nothing but memory. Across that endless land, a small tribe moved slowly, their silhouettes wavering against the horizon like ghosts of dust. They carried their world with them, tools carved from stone, baskets woven from reeds, the bones of their ancestors strung as beads upon their necks. They were wanderers of the dry earth, following the whisper of water. The narrator's voice softens here, not describing warriors or hunters, but humans as they truly were, fragile, persistent, burning with the same fire that still lives in us now. The tribe numbered 20 souls, men and women, children and elders, all bound by hunger and hope. Their skin bore the color of the land, sun-browned, cracked, streaked with the pale dust of survival. Every gesture was measured, every movement precious, for each heartbeat spent energy that might never return. They had not seen rain in many days. The sky was the color of ash. Even the trees, once green sentinels, now stood as twisted skeletons, their bark peeling like skin. The leader of the tribe, a woman named Nkara, walked at the front. Her hair was braided with strands of sinew, her shoulders broad from years of carrying stone and fire. She was not young, but the lines on her face told the story of endurance. Behind her, 2 hunters carried spears tipped with chipped obsidian. Their eyes scanned the horizon constantly, not for danger, but for the faint shimmer of hope. A lake, a herd, a sign that life still moved somewhere in this dying world. They stopped when the youngest child, no older than 6 summers, collapsed from heat. No one spoke. There were no words for despair, only gestures. Nkara lifted the child in her arms, her own breath shallow, her strength waning. Still, she walked. The tribe pressed on toward a cluster of stone hills. There they would find shade, a gift small enough to be sacred. When they reached it, the air was cooler. Shadows clung to the rocks like dark silk. The children rested in the dust, drawing with their fingers, tracing the shapes of beasts they had seen, mammoths, gazelles, lions, creatures of memory more than reality. The hunters searched the nearby valley. They found bones, not fresh, long dead, bleached white by the sun, but around those bones lay something else, tracks, massive, deep impressions in the dry clay. They looked like those of lions, but wrong, too wide, too heavy. The claws sank deep into the ground as though each step carried the weight of a boulder. The hunters knelt beside them, tracing the edges with their fingertips. The air around seemed to hold its breath. There were more prints, circling the bones, overlapping each other, leading into the grasslands beyond. When they returned to the tribe, their faces were silent masks. They said nothing. Night came slowly. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky with bruised reds and violets. The tribe gathered around a small fire, a fragile flame fed by roots and twigs. The light flickered across their faces, revealing eyes heavy with fatigue. They ate what little remained: roots, dried meat, a handful of berries found days earlier. The children slept first, curled against the elders. The adults sat in silence, listening to the faraway cry of the plains. Wind, perhaps, or something else. Nkara watched the stars. She had seen them for as long as she could remember, and yet tonight they seemed colder, more distant. The land was changing. The animals had begun to vanish. Even the hyenas, those night scavengers that once haunted every carcass, had not been seen in moons. At least, not yet. When the fire died, darkness settled thick and heavy. The air pulsed with heat even after the sun was gone. Somewhere in the distance, a lone bird cried, sharp, brief, and final. The hunters took turns watching. Their eyes followed the horizon, tracing shapes in the tall grass. The silence was strange, too complete. The plains were never silent. Far away, unseen, the earth shifted. Something breathed in the grasslands. But here, by the fire, humanity slept. The next morning broke with pale light. The air was thin, brittle. The tribe rose with slow movements, every joint stiff from the cold of night. They gathered their belongings, wrapping dried skins over their shoulders. Nkara led them onward again, guided by memory. She believed there was a spring beyond the valley, hidden between 2 hills of stone. Her mother had spoken of it long ago, when the world was greener. By midday, the tribe reached a ridge overlooking the plains. From there, they could see forever, a sea of yellow grass bending in the wind, and there, faint and shimmering, lay what seemed to be water. They ran. The adults first, then the children, laughter breaking through exhaustion. Their feet pounded the ground as hope took over reason. But as they drew closer, the truth revealed itself. It was not water. It was salt. The lake bed was dry, cracked and white, stretching endlessly under the sun. The reflection had been nothing but illusion, a mirage painted by heat. Silence again. One of the hunters fell to his knees. Another screamed at the sky. Nkara said nothing. She walked to the center of the plain and pressed her hand to the earth. It was warm, too warm. She felt something beneath it, deep and slow, like a pulse. Change. Something stirring beneath the bones of the world. As the tribe turned to leave, the wind shifted. A new smell drifted toward them, faint but unmistakable. Rot. Not the rot of plants or time, but the scent of flesh turned to dust. The hunters raised their spears. The children clung to their mothers. In the distance, vultures circled above something unseen. They walked closer. What they found was an animal, or what remained of one. The carcass of a giant gazelle, ribs torn apart, its skull cracked open as though by stone. The bones were splintered, crushed beyond recognition, the work of teeth, not claws. Nkara knelt beside it, touching the broken edge of a rib. The mark was deep, clean, powerful. She had seen it before, many seasons ago, on the bones of her own kin. Her heart grew heavy. She rose, eyes scanning the plains. The grass moved far away, as if something large had passed moments earlier. She could not see it, only the waves of motion, the trembling of the air. The sun was setting again, turning the land into a field of fire. Shadows stretched long and thin. That night, they did not light a fire. They sat in darkness, wrapped in silence. Only the faint glow of stars watched over them. The air was heavy with the scent of dry blood. Somewhere far off, carried by the wind, came a sound, a low, distant chuckle. It rose once, then faded. No one moved. No one breathed. Nkara closed her eyes, her thoughts sinking deep into the memory of stories told when she was a child. Stories of the laughing death, the ones that hunted not for hunger, but for the thrill of breaking bone. She told herself it was the wind, that the old stories were just dreams from another age. But even the wind seemed afraid to move again. Above them, the moon rose pale and cold, casting long fingers of light across the plains. Tomorrow would bring movement. Tomorrow the tribe would find water. That was what Nkara told herself. But in the dark, unseen among the grasses, eyes watched. They had found the tribe, and the silence was only the beginning. The wind changed. It came from the east that morning, slow, thick, and heavy with the scent of something wrong. It was not the smell of death. Death had a stillness to it. This was movement, decay that breathed. The tribe woke restless. The night had been uneasy. Dreams full of whispers, shapes half seen, eyes behind the eyelids. No one spoke of it, but all had dreamt the same dream. The sound of laughter, deep, throaty, distant, echoing through the grass like a call that did not fade. They broke camp before sunrise. Nkara led the way again, her steps careful, deliberate. The hunters walked ahead, scanning the plains. It should have been another day of search, of thirst, of ordinary fear. But the land itself felt changed. Birds had vanished. No movement in the grass, no insects, no hum of life. The world was holding its breath. The hunters found more bones by noon, crushed, twisted, scattered, some fresh, the flesh torn but not eaten. The marks were strange, not the ripping of claws but the crushing of jaws, bones split open for marrow, teeth strong enough to break stone. The air around the site was thick with silence. Even the wind seemed to go around it. One of the younger hunters, Tallow, knelt to study the bones. His hands shook. He pointed to a mark in the dust, an impression half covered by sand, a footprint, wider than his hand, deeper than his heel. The claws left clear gouges, curving inward like hooks. Around it, faint traces of smaller prints, overlapping, circling, a group, a pack. Nkara's heart sank. She had known this fear before, not as memory, but as story. Her mother's voice, trembling beside the fire. speaking of nights long ago when the plains themselves laughed, when beasts hunted in packs, not for food, but for dominance, for power. She looked at the horizon. Nothing moved, yet she felt them, watching, measuring. By afternoon, the heat grew unbearable. The tribe sought shade among a scatter of rocks. Children dozed against the stone, mothers fanning them with dried leaves. The hunters formed a circle, scanning the plains again and again. The silence grew heavier, and then came the smell, faint at first, then thicker, a wave of rot and wet fur. It rolled over them like fog. The air grew colder, impossibly, as if the sun itself dimmed. Flies rose in a black cloud from the tall grass nearby. The hunters turned toward it, spears raised. Something lay there. They approached slowly. It was an antelope, or what was left of one. The body torn in half, the head gone, bones crushed into splinters, the ground soaked with dark, sticky blood, almost black beneath the sun. But it was not the kill that terrified them. It was the pattern. The carcass had been arranged, not randomly, not by scavengers. Its spine was aligned perfectly east to west. Its limbs spread wide, almost ritualistic. Tallow whispered a single word, but it was swallowed by the silence. The tribe retreated before dusk. No one spoke. Even the children felt the weight of something unseen following them. That night, they chose a hilltop for safety. They lit no fire. The sky was full of stars, but their light felt cold, distant. The tribe huddled close, listening. And then came the sound. A crack in the dark. Not far, close enough to feel through the earth. The hunters froze. Every eye turned toward the plain below. The grass shimmered with faint movement, the kind that could be wind or breath. Then another crack, louder, sharper, bone-breaking. They saw nothing, only the rippling of grass in the starlight. But they could hear it, the crunch of marrow, slow and wet. Something was feeding nearby. A shape shifted in the distance. For an instant, two eyes reflected light, yellow, alive, then gone. The children clutched their mothers. The hunters raised their spears, their arms trembling, every muscle screaming for stillness. The laughter came next, low, hollow, drawn out. It echoed across the plain, one note, then another, overlapping, rising. Not joy, not madness, something worse. Intelligence. The sound rolled up the hill like a wave of mockery, as if the night itself laughed at their fear. It stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound. Nikara felt her heart slow, her hands cold. She whispered a word of protection to the wind, but the wind did not answer. Hours passed. The stars wheeled slowly above. The tribe waited, sleepless, staring into the dark. Nothing moved. Nothing came. But no one believed the danger was gone. At dawn, the first light crept over the plains. The world looked peaceful again, too peaceful. Dew glistened on the grass, painting the land in silver. The hunters descended the hill to scout. What they found stopped them in silence. Tracks, dozens of them, all around the hill. The beasts had been there, circling in the dark, just beyond sight. The footprints were clear, deep, layered over each other. A dance of death around their camp. They had not attacked. They had watched. Talo fell to his knees, pressing his hand into one of the prints. It was still warm. The tribe gathered quickly, fear now a living thing that walked among them. They packed what little they carried and moved on, fast, silent, glancing back with every step. The day grew long. The plains stretched endless. But everywhere they went, the signs followed. Crushed bones near the paths, piles of dung marked with crushed stone. The smell, always the smell, of wet fur and something rancid beneath it, like mold and blood mixed. By sunset, even the strongest could feel the weight of eyes on their backs. Nikara knew the truth now. The creatures were not random. They were herding the tribe, the same way wolves drove prey toward ambush. She felt it in the pattern of movement, in the timing of their calls. Always at dusk, always from both sides. They were learning them, studying. When darkness fell again, they camped beside a cluster of rocks. This time, no one slept. The hunters took positions, forming a half-circle around the tribe. The night grew thick. Far away, a single cry pierced the dark, long, shrill, almost human. It was answered by another, then another. They were calling to each other. The ground vibrated faintly beneath their feet. One of the hunters began to shake uncontrollably. His teeth chattered not from cold, but from something deeper, the body's instinct before death. He whispered, "They're here!" No one moved. Then came the final sound, soft, almost delicate, a bone cracking somewhere in the dark, slow, purposeful, like a warning. The tribe huddled closer, eyes wide, breath shallow. The laughter returned, faint, scattered, then gone again, carried away by the wind. But the message was clear. They were not alone. They never had been. And when the first bone cracked in the dark, they knew the night had chosen its prey. Night fell like a lid, heavy, airless. The hill of broken stones crouched against the sky like the back of a sleeping beast, and the tribe hid in its ribs, breath gathered, hearts held still as if they could be hidden too. No fire, no song, only the dark, and the memory of laughter moving somewhere beyond the grass. The hunters stood apart and together, spears angled, knuckles white, eyes watering from the strain of unbroken watching. Nkara, the one who led, walked the line without a sound, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the horizon that was no more than a softer black sewn to the black of the earth. She had counted their water, counted their strength, counted the way fear made the smallest movement a sacrifice. Numbers told a story she did not like. The wind was wrong again, not east now, not west. It moved in small circles, a slow churning that carried nothing and promised little. The smell came anyway, a slow bloom, rancid sweetness, wet fur, the sour iron of old blood. It reached them before the sounds did, as if the night itself exhaled. The first sound was soft, too soft to be hunted. A tick of stone as something brushed a rock. Then a second, from the other side. Then a third, behind. Patterns formed where there should have been randomness. The shapes were not seen yet, but their will was. A star slid behind a cloud. The hill darkened further. That was when the grass below began to move in waves, outward, then inward, then outward again, water without a river, wind without a wind. Lines of motion that had nothing to do with weather. The hunters felt the world organize around them, all edges pointing to the human circle on the hill. They came, not all at once, not in chaos. First, two, a test. Two shapes at the base of the hill, forms hunched and heavy, moving low, paws sinking without sound into dust. Their backs rose higher than a man's waist. The slope of their shoulders was wrong for cats and wrong for wolves and wrong for anything that could be laughed at. Thick necks, heads like hammers. Their faces were a blueprint of force, shortened. Brutal muzzles built not to slice, but to break. Light caught the curve of teeth, thick at the base, long at the tip, worn by years of stone-made flesh. They paused, stared. They were not afraid of being seen. Their eyes were old metal in the starlight. They breathed in, full and slow, tasting the night, tasting the tribe. And as if satisfied with what scent had told them, they sat, waiting, watching. A third appeared to the left, a fourth to the right. The hill gained corners made of fur and bone, then shadows behind those shadows. Moving farther back, silent ranks stretching along the grass, a murmur of bodies, a ripple of shoulders. The ground itself seemed to bristle. The tribe tightened. Children pressed into the hollows between their mother's arms and the rocks. Elders held the little ones' fingers and pulled them close, keeping fear from floating out of their bodies like heat. The hunters measured distances with their eyes, the span from spear point to jawline. the angles of retreat that would never be taken. The pack stood. The two in front stepped forward in perfect time, as if they had been given a drum and obeyed. Their paws were wide, toes splayed against the slope. Dust slid in small avalanches around their nails. Mouths opened. The sound that came out was not the mocking laughter yet. This was a statement. A low, resonant hum, a bone-deep vibration that said, "We are here." It rolled across stones, through ribs and spear shafts, into the aching wrists of men and women who did not move because movement would be surrender. Another pair advanced on the right, climbing higher, slower, careful. The coordination was a language. Nothing wasted, no snarling chaos, no frenzy. They spoke through position, through stillness, through the perfect agreement of bodies that had learned together across 100 hunts. Each step felt measured against the beat of human hearts. A single torch was raised. It was not meant to be raised. They had promised no fire. But one of the hunters, Tallow, whose hands had traced the prints, whose knees had knelt inside the warm depression of a step, felt the cold move inside his chest, felt the stiff fingers of terror closing. His body reached for flame because bone remembers sun, afraid not of grass, a twist of resin, a spark from stone, a soft sigh, then light, small and shaking, in the hollow of his palm. The hill leaped into relief, edges, faces, eyes. The nearest beast's pupils shrank, amber swimming around a black coin. It did not back away. It tracked the flame, judged the hand, tilted its head not like a dog, but like a judge considering a case already decided. The torch did not make them retreat. It changed their angles. The two in front shifted aside, opening a narrow lane of night where the light did not reach. As they did, the wind dipped and the smell thickened, and from that black lane came the sound they had all heard in dreams. The laughter, short, hard, layered. One voice, then a second, then a third, then many, close and far at once. It bounced off stones and slid into ears, a sound that was not a command and not a question, and not even a threat. It was description. We are many, we are awake, we are coming. The torch shook, flame stretched, thinned, snapped back. Nakara moved to steady Tallow's arm with her presence alone. She did not touch him. Her shadow fell over his shadow, and he stilled. "Hold," said nothing, and everything in the quiet of her stance. The pack moved. It began with their feet, a soft drumming, unhurried. They spread in a crescent around the hill, each form at the same distance from the next. A necklace of predators set around the throat of the tribe. A pair broke from the left, climbing at an angle that would take them not to the core, but to the rear where the elders bent around the children. Two on the right mirrored them. 4 remained below, facing the hunters head-on, eyes narrowed against the torch, but never blinking. They tested first. Quick darts forward, jaws clacking shut on air. A rush to the edge of reach, a sideways veer, a leap back. The hunters thrust and withdrew, thrust and withdrew. Spears bit fur and met nothing vital. The hyena's hides were thick, skin folded and muscled like cured leather, necks a braid of power. The thrusts did not scare them. They calculated their cost. One came in low. A shoulder slam. A spear snapped. The wood sounded like dry bone cracking. The beast did not stop. It flowed around the break and bit the haft. Jaws closing, teeth meeting with a sound that made the teeth of the living ache. The spear fell useless. 2 halves. One clamped in the hunter's numb hand. A second hunter struck from above, point seeking the eye. The hyena twisted with a speed that should have belonged to smaller things. The spear slid along the domed forehead, glanced, left a streak of blood that only made the smell stronger. The hyena's mouth opened in that not smile and closed around the shaft, tore it away, flung it like a twig into the night. Laughter again, from behind, congratulation in sound. The humans fell back a step. Another. They did not break. Nkara's stance was a rope pulled tight between fear and resolve, and the rope held. She moved to the weakest space, filled it with her shadow. Her hands were empty. She had a stone at her belt, sharp on one edge, dull on the other. and she did not reach for it because reaching would not give it power. Nothing was ceremony now, only choice. A shape larger than the rest rose beyond the front line. It came forward like a hill deciding to walk. Scar on the muzzle, ear torn into a notch, a line of pale marks along the shoulder where old teeth had met and failed to close. Its chest hung heavy, deep as a cave. Its head swung once from side to side as if weighing their breaths. Words could have been carved into its skull, and those words would have been master of bone. The alpha, the other beasts shifted when it moved. Not much, a settling of paws, a tilt of ears. The world made room for the larger gravity. It climbed in a straight line. No feints, no dancing, a declaration of axis. All motion now would curve around it. It stopped a body length away from the torch and the hunters who guarded the center. The flame wavered, reflected in those eyes as two angry suns. The alpha lifted its head. The throat swelled. The sound it made shuddered across the stone. Not laughter now, command. The hill exploded. They came in fours, left, right, left. Teeth at ankles, shoulders slamming into knees, mouths reaching for hands that held spears. The humans struck hard, and the strikes mattered. A spear bit deep into a flank, hot blood spurting down the wood. A stone edge tore an ear, sent cartilage flying. A knee met a jaw with a crack that was the cracking of many bad things. But numbers moved like water. For each blow, two bodies flowed into the emptied space. For each defense, a new angle appeared, a new hunger tested. A hyena leaped and landed on a hunter's back. Its paws were heavy as hands. Claws raked skin. Jaws closed on the meat where shoulder met neck. Bone resisted for a breath, then surrendered with a wet pop. The hunter fell forward without voice. The hyena rode him down and shook once, twice, 3 times, the way a storm shakes a tent until all ropes snap. Then it lifted its head, mouth black with work, and laughed through its teeth. The circle contracted. Fire. They needed fire. Not to scare them, to mark space, to draw a line that burned and bit. Tallow's torch was a single star in a sky of fur, and stars alone do not end nights. Nakara took the torch in both hands and slammed it into a pile of brittle grass and old roots they had gathered without telling their fear why. Flame ran outward like a beast unchained. A low ring grew, sputtering, eating the dry things the hill had stored. It made a boundary that was not a wall but a conversation no animal could ignore. The pack did not flee from flame. They respected it. They paced at its edge, eyes reflecting, tails flicking, calculating new paths that the fire made. Smoke rose and carried with it the smell of sap and resin and old sun, and for a heartbeat the tribe remembered days when fire simply meant warmth and meat cooked slow. Then a shape burst through the ring and rewrote those memories. A hyena sprinted low, a streak of shadow, fur singed, eyes narrowed to slits. It leaped across a lick of flame and slammed into an elder who had been holding 2 children behind her ribs, as if bone could be a door. The impact knocked all 3 down. The elder's arm came up. Teeth met it and crumpled it like dry reeds. The children did not scream. The scream stayed trapped in their small mouths like a bird that forgot how to fly. A hunter drove a spear into the hyena's shoulder and felt it stick and gristle, not sliding to heart. The hyena turned, mouth full of an arm, and pushed forward as if the spear were a branch to be brushed through. The hunter grabbed the shaft with both hands and felt his wrists bend backward, ligaments pleating. He held. He always held. Nakara moved like a blow sent from the earth itself. Her stone edge found the soft line inside the beast's thigh where leg meets belly. Hot, wet, a tearing. The beast stumbled, dropped the arm, and spun, mouth searching for the pain. The ring of fire faltered. Smoke thinned. Tallow fed it with grass and broken spear wood, tossing into it all that could burn. Even a necklace, even a memory carved onto a piece of bark. Flame rose again, and with it, the line. The alpha did not cross the fire. It moved along it, a dark moon circling a brighter one. It watched Ankara, and the watching had weight. It seemed to measure not just her body, but the story that led her there, the time in her shoulders, the maps in her eyes. It lowered its head and rumbled the smallest sound, a sound the others answered with a shuffle, a nudge, a shift of the hunt. They changed tactics. No more smashing of the circle's center. They began to steal the edges. A dart to the left, a test of the ring there, a feint on the right, a sudden surge at the rear where the rocks were lower. They made the humans move, and moving burned the last sweetness of their strength. The tribe shored up one place and bled at another, shored up that place and bled at a third. The pack had found the rhythm of their fear and danced to it. A boy ran across the open to reach his mother, who had been pushed aside by the surge. He ran because he was a boy, and the lines of the world had not yet taught his legs to stop. A shadow detached from a larger shadow and flowed toward him. It did not sprint. It did not need to. Its mass and his speed were matched wrong. It would meet him at the moment when momentum could not be unmade. Nakara saw the meeting coming, and time tried to thicken so that it could not arrive. But time always breaks the heart that needs it to change. She moved, faster than a body should move when so much had been taken from it. She did not reach the boy in time to lift him. She reached in time to strike. The stone kissed the beast's snout and cut it, not deep, precise, enough to make the head twitch, enough to make jaws close a finger's width later than their perfect time. Teeth grazed the boy's thigh, not the artery. He fell. The hyena rolled with the force, came up shorter, angrier, eyes narrowed to black knives. That was when the alpha crossed the line, not the fire. The line of patience. It lunged at Ankara with a speed that made everything else slow. Its paws crashed against stone and scattered pebbles like seeds. Its head swung low, seeking the hips, the place where weight is owned. Ankara stepped to the side, and the step was clean, but not clean enough. The jaw scraped her leg and took skin, took a shallow mouthful of her. Pain burned through her like a hot wire drawn slow. She did not fall. She did not surrender balance. The stone rose again, edge dark now, and slashed across the alpha's eye. It blinked. It bled. It backed one step, not in fear, but in thought. Blood ran down its cheek in a thin, bright line. The pack stilled, as if a word had been spoken by the wound. A quiet fell that was worse than sound. All bodies lowered, shoulders dipped. The circle of predators breathed in as one. Then they stormed. The ring of fire burst under their weight. Embers scattered. Sparks spun up like a swarm of small red bees. Smoke thickened. The hill vanished and reappeared inside the darkness the beasts made with their bodies. They hit from 3 places at once: rear, left, right. The front pretended to attack and did not, and that pretending opened the space where the real attack would be a heartbeat later. They slid through, each body a curved blade that did not stop at the first cut. The humans became a tighter knot, not by choice, but because pressure closes all gaps. A hunter disappeared beneath 3 bodies. Paws like stones, weight like decisions. Teeth found the bowl of his stomach, the strings inside, the soft fruit of a life. The air took him. His spear clattered, free of his hand, and rolled into fire and caught and became a black stick that meant nothing now. An elder raised both arms as if lifting the sky to keep it from falling on the children. A hyena leaped. The elder's arms met it in a cradle, bones cracked in his chest. He did not fall, not yet. He stood with the weight of the beast on him, back arched, mouth open silently as if calling to someone he had loved on a morning long ago when there were still rivers. He lowered his head and bit the hyena's neck with his human teeth. The hyena shook like laughter made flesh. The elder slid to his knees and then to the ground. The beast left him slowly, as if reluctant to part with what it had taken. Tallow lost the torch. It fell and rolled and sputtered and died with a final sigh. Darkness slammed in. The only light left was the low red mouth of the broken fire ring and the small suns in the eyes of the pack. Breath became sound. The wet rush of lungs. The hiss of effort. The unvoiced prayers quiet enough to be mistaken for wind. Blood made the stones slick. Hands slipped. Feet slid. The hill's hard certainty melted under the living and the dying. Nakara took the boy who had fallen and pushed him behind her with a motion that placed him in a narrow pocket between two rocks. She stood in the opening like a gate made of bone and will. The alpha chose her again. Its eye bled, but the blood had become a lesson, not a weakness. It fainted high, came low, twisted its head at the last instant with a corkscrew motion meant to unmake joints. Jaws closed on air. The stone struck again, and again the cut was small and exact. A woman solving a problem with a flake of the earth. The alpha lost patience the way cliff faces lose stones. Slowly, then all at once, it surged forward with weight more than speed, and the force of it drove Nakara back a half step, then another, and once momentum is owned, nothing loves you enough to give it back. Her heel hit a loose rock, and the rock turned traitor and rolled. Her body tilted. The alpha's head filled the world. Its breath was rot and heat and certainty. A spear lanced from the side. Tallow. It entered under the jaw, where the throat swells soft before the armor of the skull begins. The point bit into the tunnel where breath had been a king since the animal took its first air. The alpha's mouth opened in a sound that was not laughter and not command, surprise, pain. It snapped the spear in half with a twist and spat the wooden mouthful aside. Blood poured out slow and steady, dark as night's thought. The alpha did not fall. It stepped back, a single step that was also a promise. The pack answered. They massed. From the rear, they poured over stones like a tide remembered by the moon. Humans braced. Arms shook. Backs straightened because even a bending reed grows from a root that keeps its own shape. Time went strange. Moments lengthened around small things. A drop of blood sliding along a knuckle, the way a child's hand closed on a piece of a broken shell as if it were a charm, the tremor in a hyena's ear as an ember landed and died there. Then whole minutes vanished in a blink, swallowed by the run of muscle and will. A human fell, then another. The pack's laughter grew intermittent, not a song now, but punctuation, a series of jagged commas slicing the night into phrases of struggle and silence. The world shrank to the ground a body could hold and the sky a breath could reach. And then, as if a hand pulled a cord the length of the plain, the beasts withdrew. Not far. A dozen paces. 20. They stood in a line that curved like a smile without kindness. Tongues hung. Chests rose and fell. Blood-painted fur in wide black streaks. The alpha held its head low, the torn eye weeping. The spear wound, dripping the slow confession of a hard truth learned. It stared through the smoke at the tribe that remained, fewer now, clustered, ring broken, fire a ring no more. Silence gathered. It waited with them. It heard with them. It learned them again. The pack did not leave because it was satisfied. It left because the night had moved, and their law had been written long before any of them opened their eyes. They would kill on their time. Not on the hills, not on the humans. On the time that the alpha's blood decided. They turned as one thing with many bodies. They moved back into the grass. The grass closed behind them as if happy to welcome weight and heat and purpose. Laughter echoed once, as if the dark cleared its throat. The tribe did not move for a long while. The smell of singed fur and fresh meat and old fear hung on the hill like fog. The red mouth of the firebird collapsed into ash, into a dull glow, into nothing. Wind found its courage and began again. Stars returned where smoke had made its own sky. The survivors counted themselves in the way of the old days, by touch. A hand to a shoulder, fingers finding a wrist, warmth answering warmth, or not. Names were not spoken. Names would be spoken in the morning when the world could hold them without breaking. Tallow sat with the broken half of his spear across his knees. His hands bled where wood had torn out of them. He watched the place where the pack had stood and did not blink. His eyes were a dry riverbed, full of the memory of water. Nakara stood alone for a time. Blood had glued the skin of her leg to the roughness of her calf. She peeled it away with a slow, quiet hiss the night did not need to hear. She looked at the rocks where elders would not rise again. She looked at the pocket where the boy had hid, where he slept now because sleep had overpowered terror and taken him. She looked at the valley where the grass hid the pack that waited. She did not think of victory. She counted breath and decided to keep it. A far hyena called. The pack answered. The sound rolled along the plain like a promise kept. The hill listened to its own silence. The tribe listened to the hill. When morning came, it would find ash and broken wood and stone slick with what the body loses. It would find the prints of paws like bowls pressed into dust. It would find the story the night had written into the ground without ink. But now there was only the pause after the storm, that terrible soft place where all things feel possible again, and none of them are kind. The humans did not sleep. They watched the dark grow old. The dark watched them grow older. At last, a thin line of pale blue threaded the horizon. The night loosened its bite. The breath that had been held for hours eased out, careful not to disturb the dead. The wind brought the smell of grass washing itself in dew, and beneath it, barely there, the lingering sourness of the pack, the way a memory never leaves entirely. A single spark in the ash, touched by a stray breeze, glowed and died. No flame followed, only the color of iron cooling. The silence after chaos weighed no less than the chaos itself. It lay on shoulders and between ribs and in the hollows behind eyes. It would travel with them when they rose. It would keep step when they walked. It would stand beside them when dusk came again, and the grass began to move without wind. Somewhere out there, the alpha lay with its throat bleeding slow. It would not die. It had not been made for dying at the first wound. It would dream of the woman who cut its eye. It would wake with that dreaming in the meat of its brain and carry it into the evening. It would return, not for hunger, for the line that had been crossed. The sky put on its first light like a traveler pulling on a cloak. The hill's hard edges softened. Faces became faces again and not masks cut from shadow. Bodies moved with the careful economy of those who have lived through what should have ended them. They did not speak. The words would come later, braided with grief and ashes and the duties of the living. Now there was only standing, only breathing, only the counting of those who could be counted. The plain stretched outward, beautiful and empty, as if nothing had happened, as if beauty were not a thing that could share a sky with hunger. The pack of shadows had passed. The pack of shadows remained. Silence closed around the tribe like a cloak pulled to the throat. It was not comfort, it was weight. It would stay until the next night. It would stay until the next choice. And beneath that silence, like a drum too far to hear and close enough to feel, a single certainty beat time. They would come again. Dawn came pale and heavy, like a wound still open. The tribe stood in silence among the stones, their bodies marked by the night. Ash in their hair, blood dried on their arms, eyes hollowed by what they had seen. The air smelled of iron and smoke. The sun climbed slowly, cautious, as though it feared to shine on such ruin. Nakara moved among the dead. She did not cry. She touched each forehead with her palm, not to wake them, but to remember the warmth that once was there. Around her, the survivors gathered the living things that remained, tools, skins, the few embers that had survived the storm. There were 9 of them now, 9 from 20. The boy she had saved slept still, curled against the stone. His small hand rested on a broken shell, the same he had held during the battle. The shell's smooth curve reflected the morning light, fragile and pure, like a promise the earth was trying to keep. Tallow stood at the edge of the hill, his broken spear in hand. He stared at the horizon, where the tall grass rippled with wind. There was beauty in that motion, but no peace. The beasts were out there, watching, waiting, healing. The alpha still lived. He could feel it. They would come again. By midday, the heat returned. The survivors moved down the hill, searching for water. The river was far, but they had no choice. Every step sent whispers through the grass, soft sounds that reminded them of what had walked there before. When they reached the valley floor, they found the marks again, paw prints, dozens, deep, fresh, circles of crushed grass where the pack had rested during the night, and bones, always bones. They did not speak, they simply moved faster. But as the sun leaned west, the air began to change. The wind died. The world stilled again, like an animal listening for its own predator. Nkara stopped. She could feel it, the faint vibration beneath her feet. Distant, but coming closer. A slow rhythm. Pause on the earth. She turned to the others, her eyes calm now. Not from courage, but from understanding. The fight on the hill had not been the end. It had been the beginning. The pack was hunting again. And this time, the humans were not in their home. The valley was open, wide and exposed, with nowhere to hide. They ran, not for victory, for time, for the faint line of dark trees ahead, a grove, small and twisted, clinging to the banks of a dry stream. If they reached it, they could build fire again, a barrier of light and smoke. It was all they knew to do. They reached the grove at dusk. The trees were old, their bark blackened by lightning. A few still held dry leaves, whispering weakly in the dying wind. The tribe gathered branches, stones, anything that would burn. They worked in silence, the rhythm of their fear keeping them alive. The fire rose, small at first, then growing, fed by desperate hands. Orange light crawled up the trees, painting the world in warmth and shadow. They formed a circle around it, the children and the wounded in the center, the hunters outside, spears raised, and then they waited. The stars came out, cold, perfect, indifferent. The plain beyond the grove was dark, endless. For a while, there was nothing but the crackle of fire and the faint murmur of leaves. Then the laughter returned, far at first, then nearer. It rolled over the plain like thunder made of mockery. The pack had come. Shapes appeared at the edge of the firelight, black outlines shifting in and out of view. Eyes glowed in the dark. Dozens of them. Perhaps more. The beasts spread out slowly, encircling the grove. Their steps were soft, deliberate, almost reverent. They had learned the fire's limits. They knew where its warmth faded. Nkara's breath was steady now. Her hands no longer trembled. She looked at her people, the boy clutching the shell, Tallow standing beside her, the elders bent with exhaustion. They could not run again, not all of them. The beasts had learned too well. They would chase, divide, destroy. The only way to live was to make the pack stop chasing, to give them what they wanted. Nkara looked to the eldest among them, a man whose hair was white as ash, whose eyes had seen more droughts than rain. He sat beside the fire, his gaze lost in its heart. His name had once meant the one who waits. He turned to her before she spoke, as if he had already heard the thought forming in her chest. His nod was slow, certain. "I will stay," he might have said, though no sound left his lips. He rose, his bones cracked softly. He took the burning branch from the fire and held it high, its light trembling against his face. The skin of his hands was thin, the veins like river lines beneath dust. He walked to the edge of the circle. Nkara reached for him once, but her hand stopped midair. He looked back and smiled, the smallest curve of lips, the kind that lives not in joy, but in peace. Then he stepped beyond the light. The pack waited. The alpha stood at the front, one eye red and swollen, the other bright as gold. Its breath came in short bursts. Blood still darkened its throat. It growled low, a sound of recognition. The old man lifted the torch higher. The flame reflected in the beast's good eye. He planted the torch in the earth. Around it, he spread dry leaves and branches, building his own circle of fire, small, fragile, enough to draw their hunger toward him. The beasts paced, curious. He knelt beside the flame and whispered something, words from before language, meant only for the wind and the sky. Then he stood, opened his arms wide, and shouted. The sound was pure, defiant, a voice of one who has seen the sun enough times to greet it even at the end. The pack lunged, the fire roared. Flames reached for fur, for teeth, for breath. The grove erupted in light. The old man stood within it, his figure swallowed by orange and smoke. He did not move. He did not flee. He became part of the fire, and the fire became him. The beasts screamed. Not laughter now. Pain, confusion, rage. Some fled, their fur ablaze. Others circled blindly, snapping at shadows. The alpha pressed forward, eyes fixed on the figure in the fire. The old man's silhouette wavered, then vanished in the blaze. The sky turned red, then black. Ash rained. Sparks drifted like spirits rising from the ground. When the fire settled, the grove was silent. The pack had scattered. Only a few shapes remained at the edges, pacing in the dark, uncertain. The alpha stood still, staring at the dying flames. Smoke curled around its face like mourning cloth. At last, it turned and disappeared into the grass. The survivors waited until dawn. The fire had burned low, leaving only coals that pulsed like slow hearts. Nakara stepped forward, her feet sinking into the ash. The ground was warm, alive with memory. In the center lay what was left of the old man's torch, half buried, still glowing faintly. She knelt and touched it. Her fingers came away black with soot and tears she hadn't noticed. Around her, the others gathered, their faces gray with exhaustion. They looked to her, not for orders, but for meaning. Nakara lifted the charred torch. Smoke rose from its tip, thin and white. "This fire is his," she said, though no words passed her lips. "And through it, we live." They rebuilt the flame, small at first, then larger, feeding it carefully, reverently. The light rose again, softer now, gentler. It touched their faces, revealing something new, not victory, but endurance. The boy approached, the shell still in his hand. He placed it beside the fire, its pale curve gleaming in the light. Nakara placed the torch next to it. The two symbols, earth and flame, fragility and strength, lay together, and the tribe sat in silence around them. They did not sing, they did not speak. They simply breathed, and in their breathing, the fire learned their rhythm. The night passed without laughter. No eyes gleamed in the grass. No wind carried the scent of death. Only smoke, and the memory of a man who became the boundary between darkness and dawn. By morning, the sun rose clean, free of haze. The air was cool. A single bird sang, the first in many days. The tribe gathered what remained of their belongings. They left the grove slowly, glancing back only once. The fire still burned, though no one fed it. Its smoke climbed straight into the sky, a column of gray and light, a message to whatever gods still watched. We are not gone. The boy turned once more, eyes on the fire, his fingers tracing the edge of his shell. He did not understand what he had witnessed, but he would remember. And memory was enough. As the tribe vanished into the morning, the wind rose again, passing through the blackened trees, carrying with it the faintest sound, not laughter, not weeping, but something between the two. The sound of survival echoing through the ruins of night. The sacrifice was complete. The fire circle would burn in the stories of those who lived, and in the silence of those who didn't, and the land, the dry, wounded land, breathed once more. Morning rose with the softness of mercy. Light crept over the plains, cautious and pure, brushing the tops of the burned trees, the ashes, the bones. The wind returned, carrying the smell of water somewhere far, and the first warmth that did not hurt. The tribe walked slowly, leaving behind the grove that had become a grave and a shrine. Their shadows stretched long and thin over the pale grass. They did not speak. There were no words left that could reach the height of what they had endured. The fire behind them was still alive, a column of pale smoke rising to the sky, fading into the light of dawn. It would burn until the sun claimed it, and then its ashes would return to the soil, feeding the roots of the trees that would grow there one day. Nakara walked at the front. Her leg was bound with strips of hide, her steps uneven but steady. The boy followed close, clutching the white shell in both hands. Tallow walked behind them, carrying the broken half of his spear, now smooth and blackened from the fire. The land was quiet, too quiet, but not empty. There was something watching still, Not eyes, not beasts, but memory itself. They moved through silence like through sacred water. Every footfall felt deliberate, ancient. The air shimmered with ghosts of what had happened, the laughter, the fire, the blood, the courage, all now part of the same story. When they reached a rise in the plain, they stopped. From there, they could see the world stretch endlessly ahead, the rivers like silver threads, the distant trees like dark smoke, the sky vast and forgiving. And there, on the horizon, movement, a herd, small shapes, antelope perhaps, returning to graze where they had not dared for days. Life had come back to the land. The tribe stood in silence watching. For the first time, the boy smiled. It was a fragile smile, born of hunger and hope, but it was real. Nikara closed her eyes. The wind touched her face like a mother's hand. In that moment she thought of the old man, his quiet steps, the fire he became, the way his courage had outlived his body. She thought of all those whose names the earth had taken, whose stories would never be told, except in the breath of those who kept walking. Her people had lost everything, yet still they moved forward, because that was what humanity did. They walked, even when the path disappeared. They remembered, even when memory hurt. They built fire, even when the night was endless. The sun rose higher. Its light turned gold. The grass glowed, alive again, bending in rhythm with the wind. No laughter came from the plains, only birdsong now, fragile and pure. The beasts had gone, or perhaps they simply watched from far away, from the other side of the dawn. They too belonged to this world, this endless balance of hunger and endurance. But the day belonged to the humans. They reached the river by midday. Its water was shallow, but real. They drank, slowly, reverently, the taste of life itself. Their reflections shimmered on the surface, faces marked by ash, eyes older than they should be, but alive. Nikara looked at her reflection and did not see herself. She saw all of them, the living and the lost, the ones who had stood on the hill, the ones who had fallen into darkness, the one who had burned for them all. She pressed her palm into the water. The ripples spread outward, merging with the river's flow, a small gesture, but enough to tell the earth that she had survived. Talo knelt beside her, filling a gourd. The boy stood on the rocks, letting the wind play with his hair. For a moment, they were only shapes of life against a living world. The plain stretched silent and endless. In that silence, a story began to take root. Not of beasts and blood, but of memory. A story that would pass from one fire to another, from one mouth to another, until the night learned the sound of it. Generations would forget their names, but the story would remain. The story of the night when the earth laughed, and humans answered with fire. The river moved on, carrying ashes and light alike. Nikara rose, looking to the horizon. Somewhere beyond, she knew, there would be more rivers, more dangers, more nights. But there would also be fire. Always fire. She looked once more at the boy, at the shell gleaming in his hands. "Keep it," she whispered without sound, "so that you remember that we were here." They walked on. Behind them, the grove faded into distance. Above them, vultures circled lazily, not in hunger now, but in rhythm with the wind. The earth had returned to balance, as it always did. And somewhere deep beneath that same earth, bones would rest, human and beast alike, entwined by time, indistinguishable in the patience of soil. The sun climbed higher still. The shadows disappeared. And in the warmth of that light, in the silence that followed, something eternal stirred, the small, stubborn pulse of life, the quiet defiance that no fang could erase. It was not triumph. It was continuity. The wind whispered through the grass again, carrying a faint echo, laughter, or maybe the memory of it, softened now by distance, stripped of cruelty. It no longer sounded like hunger. It sounded like the world remembering itself. The tribe vanished slowly into the horizon, tiny figures against the vastness, carrying nothing but what mattered. fire, memory, and the will to go on. And as the last trace of them disappeared into light, the narrator's voice became the voice of the earth itself, ancient, patient, infinite. They did not conquer the land. They learned to belong to it. They did not defeat the night. They learned to keep a spark alive within it. The sky burned gold, the wind grew still, the earth rested once more, and that's how humanity survived, once again.